Ladies and gentlemen, imagine winning a revolution, defeating the most powerful empire on earth, having an army that worships you. And then someone says, "Sir, you could be king now." And you reply, "No thanks. I prefer retirement." That, my friends, is either the greatest act of humility in history or the most genius political move ever made. Today we talk about George Washington, not the statue version, not the one on the dollar bill, not the powdered wig wallpaper uncle, but the real man, the human being. It's a revolutionary, the reluctant ruler. Let's begin not with a presidency, but with mud. Yes, mud. Young Washington was not born into massive royal luxury. He was born in 1732 in Virginia, a British colony at the time. America wasn't America yet. It was basically Britain's slightly rebellious overseas project. Washington's father dies when he's 11. No inheritance jackpot. No Ivy League education. He becomes a land surveyor as a teenager. Imagine that. At 17, instead of making TikToks, he's measuring forests. But here's what's important. Surveying taught him something deep. Geography is power. Land is power. Territory is destiny. This wasn't just a job. It was a political education in disguise. Then comes war. It's a French and Indian War. Washington joins the British colonial forces. And here's the irony. The man who would later defeat Britain first learned warfare from Britain. He makes mistakes. Big ones. He gets trapped. He signs surrender documents written in French, without realizing they basically confess to assassination. It's not a glorious beginning. But leadership is not born perfect. It's forged in embarrassment. Fast forward. Tensions rise between the American colonies and Britain. Taxes without representation. Control without consent. Classic imperial move. And suddenly, revolution is in the air. Now pause here. Revolutions are romantic in movies. In real life, they are chaos. No guaranteed victory. No insurance policy. If you fail, you hang. So when the Continental Congress chooses Washington as commander-in-chief in 1775, they are not picking a superhero. They are choosing a gamble. Why him? Because he was tall. Yes, seriously, about 6'2". In the 18th century, that's basically NBA material. He looked presidential before presidents existed. But more importantly, he was calm, disciplined, and symbolically powerful. A Virginian leading a mostly New England rebellion meant unity, and unity is everything in revolution.
Now here's the part movies don't show enough. Washington loses. A lot.
New York? Lost? Philadelphia? Lost? His army? Freezing, starving, barely clothed. Valley Forge winter, 1777. Soldiers without shoes, blood in the snow, disease everywhere. And here's the question. Why didn't they quit? Because Washington didn't. Leadership sometimes is not about winning battles. It's about not collapsing when you're losing. And slowly, strategy changes. Guerrilla tactics. Surprise attacks. The famous crossing of the Delaware River. Picture this. Christmas night, ice-cold river, half-starved soldiers, and Washington standing in the boat like a painting that knew it would become a painting. That victory at Trenton, small militarily, massive psychologically. Revolutions survive on hope more than bullets. Eventually, with French support, yes, international politics always enters the chat. The Americans defeat Britain at Yorktown in 1781. War over. Now comes the real test. Power. History teaches us something brutal. Most revolutionaries become what they once fought. So what happens next is extraordinary. Washington resigns his military command in 1783. He could have stayed in power. His army adored him. Some officers even hinted at making him king. King George Washington, I imagine that timeline. But he steps down, returns to Mount Vernon, goes back to farming. Why? Because he understood something rare. Legitimacy is stronger than force. Fast forward again. The Articles of Confederation, America's first attempt at government, are weak. The country is financially unstable. States act like independent WhatsApp groups ignoring central authority. So in 1787, leaders gather to write the U.S. Constitution. And everyone knows. This system will only work if Washington is at the top. He didn't campaign. He didn't beg. He didn't tweet. He was unanimously elected as the first president in 1789. Unanimously. Even today, politicians can't get unanimous approval in their own family dinners. Now, imagine the pressure. There is no manual, no precedent, no how to be president for dummies. Every action he takes becomes a template. Should the president be called Your Majesty? Should he wear royal robes? Should he rule like a monarch? Washington chooses simplicity. Mr. President. Small detail. Massive symbolic revolution. He establishes the cabinet, appoints Alexander Hamilton as Treasury Secretary, Thomas Jefferson as Secretary of State. And here comes drama. Hamilton wants strong federal power. Jefferson wants states' rights. Sound familiar? Left versus right didn't begin on Twitter. It began in 1790. Washington's genius. Balance. He listens. He absorbs. He rarely speaks impulsively. He becomes a stabilizing center in a politically divided newborn nation. Then comes the Whiskey Rebellion. Farmers protest federal taxes. Armed resistance. Now here's the critical moment. Will the new republic collapse into chaos? Washington personally leads troops to suppress the rebellion, not to become a tyrant, but to show that law in a republic matters. Authority with restraint. That's the formula. Foreign policy, even more delicate. France and Britain are fighting again. America's young, fragile. Many Americans want to support France after all. France helped in the revolution. But Washington declares neutrality. Why? Because survival comes before ideology. This is not cowardice. This is strategic patience. And then, it's the most powerful decision of all. After 2 terms, Washington could have continued. Nothing in the Constitution limited him. He was popular, stable, respected. But in 1796, he steps down. Voluntarily. This single act may be his greatest achievement. He creates the tradition of peaceful transfer of power. No coup, no lifetime presidency. No, just 1 more term. He walks away. And by walking away, he defines democracy. Later, in his farewell address, he warns against political parties becoming too polarized. Warns against foreign entanglements. Warns against sectionalism. Honestly, if he saw modern politics, he might say, I wrote that for a reason, people. He dies in 1799, quietly, not on a battlefield, not in office. And here's the fascinating paradox. Washington was not the best speaker, not the most intellectual, not the most radical thinker. Jefferson wrote more beautifully. Hamilton argued more fiercely. Franklin was more charming, but Washington was the anchor. In dialectical terms, if revolution is thesis and chaos is antithesis, Washington was synthesis. He turned rebellion into statehood. He transformed military glory into constitutional order. He proved that the hardest thing in politics is not taking power. It is giving it up. And that is why he remains not just America's first president, but perhaps its most necessary one. So next time you see his face on a dollar bill, remember that is not just a portrait. That is a reminder that true leadership is not about domination. It is about restraint. And sometimes, it's the most revolutionary act in history. Simply saying, no, I don't want to be king. If you enjoyed this deep dive, stay till the end of history with me, because the past is never past. It is quietly shaping the present, and trust me, this was just the beginning.